The next speaker is the Honorable Irfaan Ali. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the history in relation to this bill was a necessary step by the Honorable Minister. But there is some aspect of that history that were excluded, but I would rather believe they were overlooked. And I would like to relook at some aspect of that history. The Honorable Minister Carl Greenidge and myself are the two surviving members of that select committee in this Parliament. And Joe, sorry, Honorable Member. But perhaps more importantly, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Carl Greenidge holds a special place as we debate this bill.
Very special.
Because today he came full circle back. He is full circle back. He was the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Member, when we went to this monopolistic privatization of this entity. And today, the Honorable Minister is back with us as we speak of liberalization and exiting that monopolistic position we were placed in 1990. And if the Honorable Minister is not consistent with his memory, let me remind him very gently that the Guyana Telecommunications Corporation, GTC, was a net foreign exchange earner for this country. It was sold in 1990 to Atlantic Telenetwork for US $16.5 million. At the time of the sale, it had $400 million in the bank liquidity. And it was earning between 2 to 4 million US annually. Earning 2 to 4 million US annually. 400 million in its bank account. Sold for 16 million US dollars. But very importantly, it was not 100% sale. 80% sale of the enterprise went to the company and the government retained 20%. We can assess whether that was a good privatization deal or who got the better benefit of that deal. At that time, Mr. Speaker, the PPP advocated that the 20% share should go to the local private sector. And today, we say that our local private sector must be given a distinct opportunity, whether you want to say advantageous or, I'm not going to go to preferential. I am saying, Mr. Speaker, that we should ensure that as we argued during privatization, we are arguing now that the local private sector should be taken into consideration when we are going to implement the new bill with such stringent measures that might very well exclude the private sector, as I would show later. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the PPC had a very well thought out strategy in relation to the liberalization of this sector. If we are to go through briefly and trace the history of what took place over the years, we will see the following. In 1990, we had the privatization. In 1994, the WTO agreement on trade in services, where Guyana make a few market opening commitments to value-added services. In 1999, we had the Public Utilities Commission Act with the creation of the PUC. In 2000, we had a modernization of the telecommunications sector initiative launched by the government. In 2001, we had the government issued consultation paper on the issues and options for reform of the telecommunications sector, and we initiated the series of public consultation. In 2002, we had government preparing a draft national telecommunication policy. In 2004, Cellstar began offering cellular mobile service in competition with GT&T. In 2005, the policy was updated. Draft new Telecommunications Act was prepared, along with proposal for modification to the PUC Act with support of consultants. In 2008, government signed contract with Poly to prepare draft new Telecommunications Act and regulations to finalize the sector reform process. In 2009, the EU and CARICOM signed an EPA, which also had implications for the telecommunications sector. These are some, well, we can come to why we oppose it, and we are justified now. Mr. Speaker, these were some of the action taken by the PPC government throughout the years you were there to try to push this issue of liberalization and to end the monopolistic position of one company directing the market. Mr. Speaker, I heard a noise somewhere in the room.
It's okay. They know nothing.
Where did it come from?
He doesn't know anything. It's all right. Forget it. They don't know and they don't want to know.
If the noise draws my face to the right position, then this is above that person's pay grade. Mr. Speaker, when we brought this bill and it was sent to the Special Select Committee, the Honorable Parliamenet, in making the case out that this bill should be sent to the Special Select Committee, said that the wide sweeping powers of the minister needs to be addressed. And we cannot have a bill in this modern age that would give such enormous
superpowers, he said,
powers to the minister.
Superman.
And as we were in that select committee, and as we were in that select committee,
oh, it's a superwoman.
The Honorable Parliamenet was consistent in opposing all sections and every section where he believed the minister had enormous powers. Mr. Speaker, on numerous occasions, when we brought bills to this House, the Honorable Vice President, third Vice President, Kemraj Ramjatan, second. 1, 2, 3. The Honorable Kemraj Ramjatan,
He's number 2.
one of the Vice Presidents. The Honorable Kemraj Ramjatan would say, the PPP Civic is suffering from control freakism. Control freakism. That everything is the minister. The powers are too much and too great for the ministers. Mr. Speaker, let me take your attention to Part 3 of this bill. Functions of the minister.
You worry about the government power.
They're not here anybody in this bill.
You worry about
Mr. Speaker, the axis as follows. Subject to the provisions of this act, the minister shall develop telecommunications and spectrum-related policies at the national, bilateral, regional, and international levels.
Superman.
Subject to subsection 5.
Superwoman.
Subject to subsection 5.
Didn't have it there.
And after, Mr. Speaker, and after
Superwoman, Kathy.
and after receiving the written analysis and advice and recommendation of the agency, the minister shall make final determination regarding,
That's right.
1, granting or denying applications
That's right.
for amending, renewing, suspending, and terminating license, exemptions, and frequency authorization. The minister shall. This minister is given even more powers here than in the bill we brought that was sent to the special select. Is given even more powers here than in the bill we brought that was sent to the special select committee.
True. That's true.
The minister.
Got it? I got it. Right here.
The minister shall
I got it.
decide
Another one.
which telecommunication network that may be operated and the telecommunication service, value-added service that may be provided on the classes of license and terms of condition. The minister shall determine
Relax.
The minister shall determine the instances in which a competitive process will be utilized to select license and authorization. The minister, Mr. Speaker, will determine what competitive process is used. There is no process that will be determined and will benefit from public consultation. The minister is going to decide what competitive process will be utilized. These are wide sweeping, enormous powers that we are putting in the hands of the minister. Mr. Speaker, we are moving from a monopolistic position to a dictatorial position where the monopoly of power is now residing in the minister. We are going back in time. We are reversing the hands of time when we are moving from a monopoly to a dictatorship, when we are taking all the powers and put it monopolistically in the hands of the minister. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we spoke earlier how detrimental it can be when we do not give the technical people, the competent people, the people with the experience, the people with the know-how to lead us in technical areas. The Honorable Prime Minister would have known the consequence of this in the case of the paddy, rough rice, which was meant to be paddy and not rice. But here, Mr. Speaker, the bill provides that the minister will be the representative of the government to international, regional, and bilateral telecommunication and spectrum-related organization, conferences, meeting, and other activity. The minister, Mr. Speaker, the reason this bill was sent to the Select Committee was to ensure that these powers, as identified by the Honorable Cabinet, would have been removed, and the powers would have been put in the regulating authority. The powers would have been placed in the agency that would be responsible for the management of the sector. But today, Mr. Speaker, we have not been able in this bill to achieve this objective. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, as a result of this control freakism, Mr. Speaker, we now have a moral dilemma in our hands. And the moral dilemma is this very government sent this bill to Special Select Committee to have these issues corrected and rectified. And this very government, who is in control of the process now, has brought us back this bill with identical condition. So we are faced in a moral dilemma. Was there another intent in the first instance when this bill was sent to the Special Select Committee? Was the intent at that time to slow down the liberalization of this sector? Was the intent at that time to deny the people of this country the opportunity of moving away from a monopolistic situation in the telecommunications sector? That is a moral question that is placed at the feet of this government. Mr. Speaker, if we think for a moment that those powers were enough for the minister will now give instructions to the agency, and to other appropriate government officials to take such actions with regard to telecommunications and the spectrum. The minister will give such instruction. Mr. Speaker, this leads me to a question. And the question I would like to ask at this time is whether any consultation took place between the minister and the PUC in the rates that were determined for 4G. What role did the PUC play in the determination of the rates for the 4G? As I recall it, the minister announced the granting of the 4G network. It wasn't no entity with a technical expertise, but this became a mandate of the minister. These are issues, Mr. Speaker, that will open us up for much criticism, because what we are moving to here is a position where the government, through the minister, would be not only a dominant force, but an exclusively dictatorial force in dealing with this bill and this act. Mr. Speaker, the minister have the power. Let me give some more here.
Just disrespect.
The minister have the power to do anything. The minister have the power to do anything in which, in his reasonable opinion, may be required in the public interest. Mr. Speaker, I know it has to be a powerful person, because I'll come to what the consultant recommended and what we have now. And, Mr. Speaker,
That's a recommendation.
if the minister gets tired in executing and managing all his power and requires some rest, the minister may delegate any function conferred upon him. It didn't say her here. But the law means her too. So I'll take that. I'm just helping along. the minister may delegate any functions conferred upon him by this act, other than the power of making regulations and other subsidiary legislation. Mr. Speaker, the agency would act based on the recommendations of the minister. So, what the agency would do, establish with the approval of the minister and monitor the implementation of national telecommunication and spectrum-related technical standards. Carry out the directions and orders of the minister in the performance of his function provided in Section 19. Prepare and publish annual report in such form and in such time as the minister shall specify. So the minister will specify when we will do the annual report, how the format will take, and further, the minister would advise on the activities during the year. So the minister not only would tell you when to do this report and how the report must be written, but the minister now will determine what activities this agency will undertake in the year. Oh, so what? Oh.
Read now.
You have your chance.
Read it yourself.
You have your chance to speak just now.
Why you not speaking?
Mr. Speaker.
Why you not speaking?
Mr. Speaker.
A point of order, please. On the Section 40. We have a piece of legislation before us, which the minister is quoting as indicative of what he calls dictatorial powers, suggesting that language...
Member.
No, I want to refer you to
The
language...
member is quoting or the minister is quoting?
The honourable member quoted legislation as giving the powers to minister with a word, the minister shall. And then he read a set of things. Mr. Speaker, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that if you read, Mr. Speaker, if you read a paragraph by missing out a section of that paragraph, you are misleading the House. Let me read it for you. Let me read it for you, Mr. Speaker. And I ask for the floor on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, because the honourable member keeps repeating in relation to all the sections. So I'm trying to ensure that we are not subject to this misrepresentation many times.
You will speak.
The legislation before us is clear. For all the powers that the minister has now been given, there is a qualification which he does not mention. The original legislation says the following. The original legislation says...
Honourable Minister, you have stated the point of order.
Yes.
You've pointed out the mischief that you brought to the attention of the House, if I may use that term in a legal sense, and then I believe we can proceed from there. Honourable Member, please continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am not known to be mischievous in any way. I will not create mischief for you or this House. Mr. Speaker, it's very important, as I said earlier, for us to look at the entire landscape of this sector as we move forward. In Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Speaker, and why I say this, I am not going to assign any motive to any company. But on the condition where you have two companies operating, you can very well find yourself in a duopoly. And that has its own set of disadvantage for the local market. And what I'm going to seek to propose here are conditions that I think we must promote in order to avoid such situation. Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Speaker, is perhaps one of the shining examples in the region of a country that has modernized its telecommunications sector, increase its competitiveness, and work towards the creation of wealth in this sector. And most of the recommendations we brought and we left when we were in government came from a careful analysis of what is happening in the region and what is working best in the region. In Trinidad and Tobago, you have two local companies, well, two reasonable size, mid-sized local companies, Green Dot and Masigu. And these companies, in addition to government maintaining a presence in the market, help to provide a counterforce, a counterbalance. It is very important that we develop indigenous local companies that can create this counterforce and counterbalance, so that you cannot have a situation where these two large foreign companies can come together or in local terms hold one head on a particular issue, thus not bringing the benefits that an open competitive telecom system can bring to us. We have particularly a very sensitive issue that we have to deal with in Guyana, and that is our geographic conditions. We are not a small island with our populations, or the bulk of our population center in one area. We have many regions in riverine and hinterland communities. And we have a responsibility to ensure that whatever we do must take into consideration those people living in those regions. We must therefore ensure that we promote conditions that will stimulate the growth and encourage new investment by local companies to ensure the competitiveness of the sector and to ensure that the benefits of this sector can reach the persons all across the region. We also have the issue with foreign companies that extract a lot of profit out of this sector, migrating the profit. The encouragement of local company would ensure that we have a good segment of resources and profits being left locally. More importantly is the exposure of our people to training. A lot of times, Mr. Speaker, these large companies import technical capacity. They import technical capacity. The Marriott was supposed to be a hospital. It's still operating as a hotel there. It should be. Yes. Mr. Speaker, I heard Friday night that the Marriott is a good line. Mr. Speaker, government.
We hear that's the VP's hangout.
Government, Mr. Speaker, must also be able to proactively drive investment in this sector. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret that one of our competitive areas in Guyana is our attraction for call centers. And call centers has the ability of generating large numbers of jobs. One of the inhibiting factors has always been the cost, the bandwidth costs for these call centers. But we have the opportunity here to encourage new cables.
It got worse since it's...
And I want to make a call to government. If you look at the developed countries within our region, most of them have at least 3 cables coming in. In Trinidad and Tobago, it is more. All may not be well with a fiber optic cable that government would have invested in.
Honourable Member.
Yes.
You have reached the time allotted. You've almost reached the time allotted, so that I will receive a motion for.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move that the honourable member be able to continue his presentation before this House. Thank you.
Honourable Member, you have 15 minutes more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am saying that all is not well. I'll remove the word may not be well. All is not well with the fiber optic cable project. This vision, Mr. Speaker, brought many development to the sector. It is after the announcement of this project by the government that we saw renewed, vigorous interest by the private sector in upgrading their facilities and bringing in new cable. However, Mr. Speaker, we will not be able to change our position in terms of costs if we are not able to bring in that new cable. I want to call on the government to relook at this project, the fiber optic cable project. And for us to work, whether we can determine how we want to work, for us to work in bringing and making this cable a reality for Guyana. The benefit of this cable, whether this one or another one, the benefit of such cable has enormous economic benefits for us as a country. We can become, Mr. Speaker, the leading destination for call centers. The leading destination for call centers. Though we are not competitive at this moment because of our cost for bandwidth. And if you look at bandwidth costs, for example, in Trinidad, a megabit is $18. 18 US dollars. In Guyana now, it is $850 US. 850 US dollars. Just imagine, Mr. Speaker, if we are able to bring this figure down, to match even Trinidad, how much more advantageous it will put us in becoming the dominant force for call centers in Guyana.
You can't get over it. You're in love.
Our legislation and our regulation, Mr. Speaker, must be able to support multiple fiber optic cables, whether it be from Digicel or any other company that is willing to bring connectivity to Guyana. Mr. Speaker,
You don't want the higher
All right. All right. If you want to go into that direction, I'll take you. Mr. Speaker, the PPC government, from the inception, worked towards liberalization. And let me give you some examples. I'll give you the examples now that you want. One, we granted TDMA license to Lloyd O'Brien for cellular service in Berbice. Two, we granted license to Wesley Curtin, U-Mobile Corporation, that ultimately became Digicel, with the introduction of GSM. Without this license, GT&T may not have switched to GSM from TDMA. We granted license to many wireless providers, including Noel Holder, INET, for wireless internet in ISM 2.4 gigahertz band. We are not saying, Mr. Speaker, we did anybody a favor. We did this because we were committed to the liberalization. And you were mentioning names just now. I'm calling.
You call the names.
Mr. Speaker, we granted license for broadband.
They're Guyanese, they count. Well, so do other people.
We granted permission. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to address this issue. I want to address this issue.
Said you have a problem.
When we're in the public, you hear the words? Cronyism, nepotism.
Honourable Member, you are still speaking on the merits of the Telecommunications Bill, are you?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable members are making it sound as if one investor who might be associated or there is an opinion that they're too close to the PPP would have been granted a license. I will come to that. Mr. Speaker, we, when we were in government, granted permission to over 30 cable operators to do both wires. Mr. Speaker, you see? One time, we granted to people who are close to us. When we give the example of how many we granted, the next question, you're supposed to. So we're not supposed to give people who the honourable members believe to be associated with us. No. What, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker.
Relatives, you don't know nothing.
Mr. Speaker, we stand proud of our record. And we granted license to anyone who qualified for the granting of the license. And when we were in government, look at all those who received license. You want to talk about companies? Every day, Mr. Speaker, you can criticize the owner for a company. Let us use an example of e-networks. Well, Mr. Speaker, do we for one moment sit down and understand how many jobs they create?
And the investment?
Do we for one moment sit down and look at the level of investment they've made in this country?
We're not Guyanese.
Do we sit down for one moment? Do we sit down for one moment and try to understand how many young persons were trained technically because of those companies? Do we ever try to do this? Some of these companies has completely modernized the landscape. Completely modernized the landscape, opening up opportunities. But this is the way we treat the private sector. The government is demonstrating the way they will treat the private sector. But as I said, Mr. Speaker, you can call it what you want to call it. We stand with the decisions we have made to improve the lives of the people of this country. We are not saying that we did it all perfect. We have never said that. We have never laid such claim in this country. But what we can say, Mr. Speaker, is we always did it with the interest of the people at the center of our attention. Mr. Speaker, no, Mr. Speaker, when we provide the answers for the propaganda, we're opening up worms. We must allow it to go all the time. Allow it to fuel. Mr. Speaker, the consultants in the report said on page 3, the August 2001 report identified both deficiencies in the PUCA and weaknesses in the Public Utilities Commission as an institution, primarily underfunded with lack of resources and expertise. A major problem in the regulation of the telecom sector was therefore, I vote yes. In the consultant view, Mr. Speaker, to address the issue of telecommunication, we had to ensure we look at the modernization of the PUC and resourcing the PUC with both the proper technical and financial resources that will allow it to function in this modern era when we have the implementation of this bill. Mr. Speaker, we also had a number of outstanding issues with GT&T when we were negotiating the liberalization. We had outstanding tax issues. We do not want to wake up one morning and see a DDL headline. We do not want to wake up and see a tax settlement headline in the newspaper. The Minister of Finance has already assured this nation that such mistake would not be made again. But Mr. Speaker,
could the honourable member please inform us also when I did such a thing?
Honourable Minister, the Honourable Minister of Finance rose a moment ago. This is a sir.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
Then please let the chair know.
And understand our reporter. Can the honourable member please remind us out when I did make such a commitment?
What is the point of order, Honourable Minister?
The honourable member said that I assured the House.
not the House.
I assured the nation that I would not make such a mistake again as it relates to
not you, man. But such a mistake would not be made.
Who said me? He said me.
Such a mistake.
I know he's prepared to withdraw, so let him withdraw.
I thank the Honourable Minister.
Such a mistake.
Honourable Mr. Ali, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir.
If you misquoted the minister, it may be a good thing to remove it from any of your discourse so far.
Mr. Speaker, if I misquoted the minister, I ask that it be removed from any. And
Is that a withdrawal of this?
Yes. We go on.
Please.
Time.
Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker,
The honourable member might wish to know that he has so far used 40 minutes.
I'm coming to a close, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we would like the Honourable Minister to say whether any settlement has been reached in relation to any outstanding taxes or liabilities before liberalization. Mr. Speaker, GT&T had also previously indicated that they were willing to bring a second submarine cable. However, it may be advantageous to the development of a competitive telecommunication market in Guyana. I'm reading from the report. For a provider other than GT&T to bring such a cable to ensure competition. Mr. Speaker, I wish to conclude by saying that Guyana is in desperate need of this liberalization. And all of us must collectively support liberalization. All of us would be on the right side of history by supporting a bill that would do exactly what the Honourable Member, Mr. Carl Greenwich, wanted it to do when we sent it to Select Committee. And that bill, whilst it allows the liberalization, must not create a new monster. Must not create a new monster by the power it gives to the minister. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I've outlined very clearly the mischief in this bill in relation to the powers granted to the minister. And I think we have a responsibility in taking this necessary and important step to liberalization, to relook at this bill in a special Select Committee, to correct the deficiency in relation to the powers granted to the minister. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, it is now 4 o'clock. We will have a recess for 1 hour and we will return at 5 o'clock.